In the summer of 1961, Diana Frances Spencer was born into an aristocratic family at Park House, Sandringham, in Norfolk. She was not born with a public destiny, yet the world would one day come to regard her as one of the most recognizable and beloved figures of the late 20th century. Her story began in a household shaped by privilege, but also by emotional strain. And the shy girl who grew up there would later astonish millions by turning vulnerability into public strength. In her teenage years, Diana was quiet, careful, and deeply sensitive. By many accounts, she was not the most confident student, and she often preferred observation to performance. At 16, in 1977, she briefly encountered Prince Charles, who was then dating her older sister Sarah. That early meeting was not romantic deference, but a small, almost accidental prelude to a life that would soon be rewritten by the attention of the press and the monarchy. By the late 1970s, Diana was living in London and working in childcare and nursery settings, a detail that mattered more than it seemed. Before she became a princess, she already had a practical instinct for children, small routines, and emotional care. In 1980, media interest in her connection with Prince Charles intensified, and by February 1981, their engagement was announced. News reports at the time framed her as a fairy tale bride, but the story that followed was far more complex than the polished imagery suggested. On July 29, 1981, Diana married Prince Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral in a global televised event watched by an estimated 750 million people. The spectacle was immense, yet Diana was still privately a young woman trying to find her place inside an institution built on restraint and protocol. What transformed her from royal newcomer into public figure was not only her title, but her instinctive style of direct human contact. She leaned down to children, held hands with patience, and dissolved the distance that formal tradition often maintained. One of the most important turning points came in the 1980s during the AIDS crisis. At a time when fear and misinformation led many to avoid physical contact, Diana famously shook hands with AIDS patients without gloves and without hesitation. That gesture, simple but radical, was covered widely in the press and helped shift public perception by showing that compassion could be more persuasive than ceremony. In 1987, when she opened the first purpose-built HIV and AIDS unit in the United Kingdom, the symbolism was unmistakable. Empathy in public, not caution masquerading as dignity. Her humanitarian work extended well beyond that. She drew attention to leprosy, homelessness, and issues affecting children. In 1997, just months before her death, she visited Angola and walked through a landmine field with the charity Halo Trust, helping draw international attention to landmine victims. News coverage of that trip described her as fearless, but perhaps the more important truth was that she understood the power of presence. She did not merely endorse causes from a distance, she entered the emotional and physical terrain of suffering. Diana also reshaped fashion into a language of strategy and mood. Early on, her wardrobe reflected the expectations of the royal family, but over time, she learned to use clothing as a form of communication rather than decoration. The so-called revenge dress, worn in 1994 after Charles publicly admitted infidelity, announced autonomy with elegant force. Her clothing evolved from innocent pastel romance to cleaner silhouettes, tailored suits, and confident evening wear. The effect was not about price or luxury alone, it was about timing, symbolism, and self-definition. She understood that a dress could express independence, vulnerability, or control, before a single word was spoken. Her public life, however, was never free from pain. Diana spoke openly about bulimia and the insecurity that haunted her during the early years of marriage. In a 1995 BBC interview, she described the eating disorder as a symptom of emotional distress, not vanity. That candor mattered because it gave language to a hidden struggle that many people, especially women, experienced privately. She revealed that beneath the glamour was a person wrestling with loneliness, scrutiny, and the pressure to appear composed while feeling unsteady inside. By the 1990s, Diana's image had changed again. She was no longer simply a princess in the traditional sense. She had become a global humanitarian icon, admired for empathy rather than rank, and remembered as the people's princess because she seemed to understand that public life should be felt as much as performed. Her influence crossed several worlds at once: monarchy, media, fashion, and social conscience. When she died in Paris on August 31st, 1997, tributes came from across the world. The grief was immediate and collective because people were mourning more than a celebrity. They were mourning a public figure who had learned in front of millions how to transform shyness into connection, fragility into advocacy, and visibility into service. Her life did not begin as a legend. It became one because she used attention, not merely to be seen, but to see others more clearly.